Story 1. This happened in 2019. I was working the overnight shift at a Sunoco station off Route 30 in rural Pennsylvania when a woman came in at 2:47 a.m., bought a pack of gum, then sat in her car in the parking lot for the next 4 hours without moving. Let me back up. I was 23 at the time, working nights to pay my way through community college. The station was one of those old ones surrounded by farmland, nothing around for miles except fields and the occasional truck stop. My shift was 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and most nights I'd see maybe 10 customers total. I was used to the emptiness. I actually preferred it. That night started like any other. A few truckers came through around midnight. A couple of teenagers bought energy drinks around 1 a.m., then it went dead. I was restocking cigarettes behind the counter when the bell chimed at 2:47. A woman walked in. She was maybe in her 30s, with brown hair pulled back, wearing a gray sweatshirt and jeans. Normal looking. She walked straight to the candy aisle, grabbed a pack of spearmint gum, brought it to the counter, and paid with exact change. Didn't say a word the entire time. I said, "Have a good night," and she just nodded and left. I watched her on the security monitor walk to her car, a dark blue Honda Accord parked at Pump 2. She got in the driver's seat, and then she just sat there, engine off, lights off, just sitting. I figured maybe she was checking her phone or eating the gum before driving, but 10 minutes passed, then 20, then an hour. She hadn't moved. Her car was positioned so I could see her silhouette through the driver's window. She was just sitting there, facing forward, hands on the steering wheel. Around 4 a.m., I started getting genuinely creeped out. I went outside to take out the trash, partly as an excuse to get a closer look. As I walked past her car, maybe 15 feet away, she turned her head and looked directly at me. We made eye contact for about 3 seconds. Then she turned back to face forward and put her hands back on the wheel. I went back inside and called my manager. He didn't answer. It was 4 a.m. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? A woman is sitting in her car. That's not illegal. I just kept watching the monitor. At 5:30 a.m., another customer pulled in. A guy in a work truck, probably heading to an early shift somewhere. He parked right next to the woman's car. The moment he got out of his truck, she started her engine and drove away. At first, there were no lights on, so she drove about 50 feet before turning them on. Then she was gone. The guy came inside and bought coffee. I asked him if he'd noticed the woman in the car next to him. He said, "Yeah, it looked like she was sleeping." But she wasn't sleeping. I'd been watching her for 4 hours. She never leaned back, never closed her eyes, never moved except to look at me that one time. About a week later, my manager mentioned that a woman had been arrested at another gas station about 20 miles down, Route 30. She'd been sitting in the parking lot for hours, watching the attendant. When police searched her car, they found duct tape, zip ties, and a hunting knife in her trunk. I asked what she looked like. He said brown hair, average build, drove a dark blue Honda. I never saw her again. But for months afterward, every time a car sat in our lot too long, I'd feel that same cold dread in my stomach. I quit that job about 6 months later. Moved to a different town, got a day shift at a warehouse. I still think about her sometimes, sitting there in the dark, hands on the steering wheel, waiting for something. Story 2. This happened in 2021. I was doing a security patrol at a distribution warehouse outside Memphis, when I found a door that had been locked an hour earlier standing wide open, and wet footprints leading inside that stopped in the middle of the floor. I was 28 and had been working security for about 3 years at that point. The warehouse was massive, probably 300,000 square feet, filled with rows of shelving units stacked 20 feet high. My job was simple. Patrol the perimeter every 2 hours, check all the doors, monitor the cameras, report anything unusual. The shift was from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I was the only person in the building. That night was a Thursday in November. Cold outside, maybe mid-30s. I did my first patrol at midnight. Everything was fine. All doors locked, nothing on the cameras. I went back to the security office, watched some videos on my phone, and drank coffee. At 2 a.m., I started my second patrol. I always did the same route. East entrance, south loading docks, west emergency exits, north receiving area, then back to the office. Everything was normal until I got to the north receiving area. Door 7, which I had personally checked and confirmed locked at midnight, was standing open about 6 inches. Cold air was blowing in from outside. I pulled out my flashlight and approached carefully. The door opened outward, so someone would have had to push it from the outside to open it. But our doors had crash bars on the inside and keycard access on the outside. You couldn't open them from outside without a valid keycard, and the system logged every entry. I checked my tablet. No entries logged for door 7 since the day shift ended at 6 p.m. I pushed the door open wider and looked outside. Nothing. Just the empty loading area and the dark parking lot beyond. I stepped back inside, and that's when I saw the footprints. Wet footprints on the concrete floor, like someone had walked through a puddle outside and tracked water in. They led from the door toward the main warehouse floor. I followed them with my flashlight. They went about 40 feet, past the first row of shelving, then just stopped. Right in the middle of the aisle, like whoever made them had just vanished. Or started walking more carefully. I stood there for a moment, listening. The warehouse was silent except for the hum of the climate control system. I called out, "Security, anyone in here?" My voice echoed off the high ceilings. No response. I radioed my supervisor. He was off-site, monitoring cameras remotely from a central office downtown. I told him about the door and the footprints. He checked the camera feeds and said he didn't see anyone. But here's the thing about that warehouse. The cameras covered the main aisles, but the shelving units created hundreds of blind spots. Someone could easily move through the building without being seen if they knew where the cameras were. My supervisor told me to do a full interior sweep. I didn't want to, but it was my job. I spent the next hour walking up and down every aisle, checking behind pallets and looking under shelving units. I found nothing, no one. Just row after row of boxes in the dark. I went back to door 7. It was closed now. I hadn't closed it. I checked my tablet again. Still no entries logged. I tried the handle. Locked. I pushed against it. Solid. I finished my shift in the security office with the door locked. Kept watching the cameras, kept seeing nothing. When the day shift supervisor arrived at 6 a.m., I told him everything. He checked the door, checked the logs, walked the area where I'd seen the footprints. The floor was dry now. No evidence anything had happened. He said maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe the door hadn't been fully latched earlier and the wind pushed it open. He couldn't explain the footprints. I couldn't either. I worked there for another 2 months before transferring to a different site. Nothing else happened, but I never felt safe in that building again. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound made me freeze, like someone was watching me from the dark. Story 3. This happened in 2018. I was working the night shift at a nursing home in rural Wisconsin when one of the dementia patients told me very clearly and calmly that the man in the hallway had been watching me all night. I was 25 and had been working as a night shift CNA for about a year. The facility was small, maybe 40 residents, mostly elderly folks with various stages of dementia or other conditions requiring round-the-clock care. My shift was 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and usually it was just me and one other CNA covering the whole building. That particular night, my coworker had called in sick, so I was alone. It wasn't ideal, but most residents slept through the night, and I had a pager system if anyone needed help. The building was shaped like an H, with two long hallways connected by a shorter middle section. Residents' rooms lined both sides of the hallways, and my station was at the intersection in the middle. Around 2 a.m., I was doing my rounds, checking on each resident. Most were asleep. I got to room 14 where Mrs. Patterson stayed. She was 84, had moderate dementia, usually very confused but harmless. When I opened her door to check on her, she was sitting up in bed, staring at the doorway. "He's been walking back and forth all night," she said. Her voice was clear, not the usual confused mumbling. "The tall man. He keeps looking in at me." I asked her what man she was talking about. She pointed past me, toward the hallway. "Him. He's standing right there." I turned around. The hallway was empty. I told her there was no one there, that she must have been dreaming. She shook her head. "He's real. He's wearing a dark coat. He's been watching you too when you sit at your desk." I felt a chill run down my spine. My desk was visible from certain parts of the hallway. If someone were standing in the right spot, they could watch me without me seeing them. I told Mrs. Patterson to go back to sleep and closed her door. I walked back to my station, checking every doorway and corner as I went. Nothing. Nobody. The building was silent except for the usual sounds, the hum of the heating system, and the occasional cough from a room. I sat at my desk and tried to convince myself it was just dementia, just confused ramblings. But I couldn't shake what she'd said. "He's been watching you too." I started paying more attention to the hallways. The lights were dimmed at night, bright enough to see but creating shadows in the corners and doorways. Every time I looked up, I expected to see someone standing there. Around 4 a.m., I heard footsteps. Clear footsteps, like shoes on the tile floor, coming from the east hallway. I stood up and looked. The hallway was empty. The footsteps stopped. I waited, listening. Nothing. I conducted another round of the building, checking every room, closet, and bathroom. All the exterior doors were locked. All the windows were secure. There was no one there who shouldn't be there, just me and 40 sleeping residents. I went back to my desk. At 5:30 a.m., I heard the footsteps again. This time, they were closer, maybe 20 feet down the hall. I stood up fast, knocking my chair back. I stared down the hallway. For just a second, maybe less, I thought I saw something move. A shadow, darker than the others, slips around the corner at the end of the hall. I didn't investigate. I stayed at my desk until the day shift arrived at 7 a.m. I told the morning supervisor about Mrs. Patterson's comments and the footsteps I'd heard. She checked the building and the security log. Nothing unusual. She said Mrs. Patterson often talked about seeing people who weren't there. It was part of her condition. But here's what still bothers me. After my shift, I checked the sign-in log at the front desk. Everyone who entered the building was supposed to sign in, even staff. The log showed that at 1:47 a.m., someone had signed in with an illegible signature. Just a scrawl. No sign-out time. No name I could read. I showed it to the supervisor. She couldn't explain it. The front door was supposed to be locked after 9 p.m., accessible only with a staff key card. The key card log showed no entries at 1:47 a.m. Whoever signed that log hadn't used a key card to get in, which meant either they had a key or someone let them in. I never found out who it was. I worked at that nursing home for another 6 months, and nothing like that happened again. But I always wondered about that night, about the man Mrs. Patterson saw, about the footsteps, about that signature in the log. Someone had been in that building with me, and I have no idea who they were or what they wanted. Story 4. This happened in 2020. I was working the overnight front desk at a hotel in Albuquerque when a guest called down at 3:15 a.m. to report that someone was standing outside his window on the 4th floor. I was 30 at the time and had been working hotel front desks for about 5 years. This was a mid-range chain hotel, Nothing fancy, mostly business travelers and families passing through. The overnight shift was from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and I was usually the only one there, except for a sleeping maintenance guy. The night started normally. Check-ins slowed down around midnight, and by 1 a.m., the lobby was empty. I was doing paperwork when the phone rang at 3:15 a.m. Room 412. I answered, and the guest, a man, sounded panicked. "There's someone outside my window," he said. "They're just standing there on the ledge, looking in." I told him that wasn't possible. We didn't have balconies, and the fourth-floor windows didn't have ledges wide enough for someone to stand on. He insisted. "I'm looking at them right now. They're pressed against the glass. I can see their face." I told him to stay in his room and that I'd send someone up immediately. I called the maintenance guy, woke him up, and we both went to the fourth floor. I knocked on 412. The guest opened the door, a middle-aged man in pajamas, visibly shaken. He pointed at the window. They were right there, right there. Then they just moved to the side and disappeared. I looked at the window. It was a standard hotel window, sealed shut, no balcony, no ledge. I went to the window next to his room, in the hallway, and looked out. Nothing. No one. Just the dark parking lot 4 stories below. The maintenance guy and I did a full check of the fourth floor. We looked in every room that wasn't occupied, checked the roof access, checked the fire escapes. Nothing. No signs anyone had been climbing around outside the building. I went back to the guest and told him we hadn't found anyone. He was adamant about what he'd seen. He described the person as wearing dark clothing, face pressed against the glass, just staring at him. He said they'd been there for at least a minute before he called down. I offered to move him to a different room. He accepted. I put him in a second-floor room on the other side of the building. He seemed calmer but still rattled. I went back to the front desk and pulled up the exterior security cameras. We had cameras covering the parking lot and the main entrance, but nothing covering the upper floors of the building itself. I couldn't see the fourth-floor windows from any angle. I watched the footage from around 3:15 a.m. anyway, looking for anyone walking around the building or approaching from the parking lot. Nothing. No movement at all. Around 4:30 a.m., the phone rang again. It was the same guest, now in his new room on the second floor. His voice was a whisper. "They're here again. Outside this window. Same person. They followed me." I felt my blood go cold. I told him I was coming up. I grabbed the maintenance guy and we both ran to the second floor. When we got to his room, he was standing in the corner farthest from the window, shaking. The curtains were closed. I walked to the window and pulled the curtains open. The window looked out over a side alley. And there, illuminated by the security light, I saw something that made my heart stop. Handprints on the outside of the glass. Fresh handprints, fingers pointing down like someone had been pressed against the window from outside. We were on the second floor. There was nothing below that window except a sheer wall and concrete. I called the police. They came out, searched the area, found nothing. They said maybe someone had used a ladder, but there were no ladder marks on the ground. No evidence anyone had been there. The handprints were real, though. The officer saw them too. He couldn't explain them. The guest checked out immediately at 5 a.m., didn't even ask for a refund, just wanted to leave. I finished my shift in a daze. Kept looking at the windows, expecting to see a face pressed against the glass. I worked at that hotel for another year. Never saw anything like it again. But every night shift, every time I walked past a window, I thought about those handprints. And I wondered if someone was out there in the dark, looking in, waiting for me to notice them. Story 5. This happened in 2022. I was working overnight security at an office building in downtown Chicago when I watched a man on the security cameras enter an elevator on the ground floor, and the elevator arrived on the 10th floor empty. I was 34 and had been doing security work for almost a decade. This building was a standard downtown high-rise, 20 floors, mostly law firms and financial companies. At night, it was completely empty except for me and the occasional cleaning crew who usually finished by midnight. My shift was 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. That night, the cleaning crew left around 11:30 p.m. After that, I was alone. The building had good security. Keycard access at all entrances, cameras in every hallway and elevator, motion sensors on each floor. I sat in the security office on the ground floor, monitoring the feeds on a bank of screens. At 1:47 a.m., I saw movement on the lobby camera. A man had entered through the main entrance. I sat up, immediately alert. The doors were supposed to be locked after 9 p.m., accessible only with a valid key card. I checked the access log. No entry recorded. I watched the man on the camera. He was wearing a dark suit, carrying a briefcase. He walked calmly across the lobby like he belonged there. He went straight to the elevators and pressed the button. He waited. The elevator doors opened. He stepped inside. The doors closed. I switched to the elevator camera. The man was standing in the corner of the elevator, facing the camera. He wasn't moving, just standing there, briefcase at his side. I watched the floor indicator climb. 5, 6, 7, 8. The man didn't move. He just stood there, staring up at the camera. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. The elevator stopped at 15. The doors opened. The man didn't get out. He just stood there. Then, slowly, he smiled. Not a normal smile. Too wide, showing too many teeth. He lifted one hand and waved at the camera. Then the elevator doors closed. I waited for the elevator to move again, but it didn't. It just sat there on 15. I switched to the 15th floor hallway camera. The elevator doors opened. No one came out. The elevator was empty. I stared at the screen. I rewound the footage and watched it again. The man entered the elevator on the ground floor. The elevator went up. The doors opened on 15. The elevator was empty. He never got out. He just wasn't there anymore. I called my supervisor. He didn't believe me, told me to check the building. I didn't want to, but I took the other elevator up to 15. The floor was dark except for the emergency lights. I walked the entire floor, checking every office, every bathroom, every closet. Nothing. No one. I took the stairs down, checking each floor as I went. All empty. I went back to the security office and reviewed all the camera footage from the past hour. The man appeared on the lobby camera at 1:47 a.m. He entered the elevator. He rode to 15, and then he was gone. He didn't appear on any other camera in the building. Not the 15th floor hallway, not any stairwell, not any other floor. He just vanished. I filed a report. My supervisor came in early the next morning and reviewed the footage himself. He saw the same thing I did. He couldn't explain it. He said maybe there was a glitch in the system, maybe the footage got corrupted somehow. But I watched that man wave at the camera. I saw his smile. That wasn't a glitch. The police were called. They searched the building top to bottom. Nothing. No sign anyone had been there. They checked the keycard system, the locks, everything. All secure. They had no explanation for how the man got in or where he went. I kept working at that building for another few months. Every night, I'd watch the lobby camera, waiting for the man in the suit to appear again. He never did. But sometimes, late at night, the elevator would go to random floors on its own. The doors would open, the cameras would show an empty car, and then it would return to the lobby. Maintenance said it was a malfunction. Maybe it was. But every time those elevator doors opened on an empty floor, I'd watch the camera closely, looking for a man in a dark suit, looking for that smile. I never saw him again, but I never stopped looking. Subscribe for more stories and support us.